Greetings, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Women's Bar Association's Women and Leadership Symposium. My name is Bridget Bailey Lipscomb, and I am proud to be serving as President-elect of the Women's Bar Association this year. This Passing It On, How to Be an Ally and Mentor in Senior Management session can only be exceptional because we have a dream team panel. Now, before I introduce our moderator, Kate Neville, who will in turn introduce our speakers, I want to share a bit about what the WBA has been doing this year. Our theme is the importance of allies and friends. Programming this year has been and will continue to be focused on allyship. A few weeks ago, we held our annual Stars of the Bar celebration, and if you were unable to join, the video is now available online. Our champions of suffrage stars, Belva Ann Lockwood, Congressman John Lewis, and Kristen Clark, were not only suffragists that worked tirelessly for the ratification of the 19th Amendment, but also lifelong voting rights advocates. And during our celebration, we were careful to acknowledge that the 19th Amendment did not guarantee the right to vote for Black women or Native women. Later during our Stars Week, we hosted a voter suppression program, and we brainstormed and analyzed on how the WBA can be a better ally in support of ensuring access to the ballot box for all. Subsequently, we turned to next steps. And in preparation for post-election activities, we presented Demystifying Political Appointments, which is a program we have hosted every presidential year for the last 20 years. And last week, we launched this symposium by featuring Colleen Jenkins, the great-great-granddaughter of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And we received insightful leadership tips from an esteemed panel. Now, please indulge me just a few minutes more while I take care of one more piece of important business before I introduce Ms. Neville. We must thank our sponsors. So our leadership sponsor is Paul Weiss. Thank you. Our benefactor sponsors are Freddie Mac and T-Mobile. Our underwriter sponsors are Wilkie Farr Gallagher, McCrae Inc., and Brian Cave. Thank you to our sponsors. I won't go through all of the rest of them because there are too many to mention. So, she hails from Texas and lived in New York before moving to DC. Kate Scuria Neville is a leadership and executive coach who consults with experienced attorneys as they navigate to senior management and leadership roles in law firms, financial institutions, global nonprofits, and industry associations. Her expertise and certifications in diversity coaching have been extremely beneficial to the Women's Bar Association's Anti-Racist Initiative and Toolkit this year. Among other high-stakes conversations, she has recently facilitated a group on conversations about race as part of Georgetown University's Institute of Transformational Leadership. She's a cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School and a graduate of Princeton University. She worked in private practice in New York, has received numerous appointments at prominent universities, and has held senior management positions at nonprofit organizations. Critically important, she is co-chair of the Women's Bar Association Diversity Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in good hands. I present Kate Neville.
Thank you so much, Bridget, for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. And welcome to everyone. We're very happy that you could join us today. I wanted to kind of give a run through, first of all, of what the format to expect is. So we will be gathered here for the first 45 minutes about as a full panel, and we'll have some time for questions at the end of that. Then we're going to break into smaller groups with each of the panelists serving as a moderator as we walk through some scenarios that Karen has expertly put together. Karen Lockwood, one of our panelists, and I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves momentarily. So after those scenarios, the thinking being that actually this is hands-on work to be done, and taking on some of those roles will, I think, help everybody walk away with a little more perspective on some of the issues we're going to talk about today. Then at the end, we're going to leave some time to come back together as a group to share our experiences in the smaller breakout rooms. And then we'll stick around for some more questions at that point, to the extent that's helpful to people. So the program will officially end at 6:30, and then we will stay until 7 for those who would like to. All right, so thank you again. I'm going to turn to each of the panelists and ask them to introduce themselves, and they all have long, very esteemed professional lives, and I'll ask them to focus specifically, to the extent they can, on this type of work in terms of diversity, mentorship, allyship, and what their experience has been as a more senior level manager in those conversations. So, Karen, can we start with you?
Thank you, Kate. It's such a pleasure to see all y'all again. I'm sitting here in Western Virginia, although I usually am in Colorado now. So that introduces my management experience, and I'll work backwards a little bit. I was so privileged. One of the biggest experiences in my life was to serve as president of the Women's Bar Association of DC for 1 year in 2005-06. And that was the year that we initiated the initiative and had the first event around our commitment that in order to address real progress and make real progress, we have to include people universally. So we really brought in a lot of firms who volunteered to sign up, a lot of men, a lot of managing partners, most of whom were men, and a few of whom were women, and a lot of women. We had an open microphone over the course of 4 sessions, 4 hours each, first Monday of every month, kind of a Supreme Court thing. We had an open mic, and the president of the DC bar was the person walking around with it and soliciting questions to the room. So it was Las Vegas rules. We got a lot of work done and wrote that report. That thrill of mine, to me, was really instrumental in deciding to shift my practice from 30 plus years of commercial trial work with a bunch of pro bono included in that, to focusing on the moment of diversity and championship. So I founded the Lockwood group. And that's one context in which I can speak in terms of management. I was a partner in Harry Simon the last decade, and in Collier, Shannon, Rill, and Scott the decade before that. So that was, again, management responsibility. And as I was working through the Lockwood group, I got a call to invite me to be the executive director at NITA, the National Institute for Trial Advocacy, which is a very different kind of a leadership experience. It's a nonprofit board, 23 board members. There were 21 at any one time. Federal appellate judges, training partners of major global law firms, a lot of people all the way through the profession, professors and general and in-house counsel. So to manage that staff of non-professionals and the faculty of volunteer lawyers who are all professionals, 500 to 700 of them, was a significant lesson to me in terms of management style and the big distinctions between the way we practice law when we excel at it we do even more to take it apart into its piece parts. We're going to seek today to put that on the shelf and think about the management side, which is, if anything, the yin to that yang. And that's what I'll be talking about. So it's so good to see you all. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Karen. Next, I'd like to ask Ben Wilson to go ahead and introduce himself.
Sound.
You're on mute, yeah.
Here we go.
There we go.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Ben Wilson. I'm the chairman of my law firm, Beveridge and Diamond. We are an environmental boutique, and our practice covers U.S. and around the world. I am interested in diversity for many reasons, but more than anything, this issue, particularly as it relates to women, is important because we are ultimately about delivering a service, our firm is, and providing opportunities for talented people, and at least half of them are women. And I would say that our firm, like others, has enjoyed some success, but we still have a ways to go. Just over 30% of our partners are women. 46% of our attorneys are women or minorities, and we have in several of our offices women who are managing partners, and the person who runs our firm today, Catherine Smichkovich, is a woman. So we've made progress, but we must improve more, because we have a critical challenge, please, to ensure that women coming up through the ranks are giving meaningful opportunity, and they are giving credit for the work that they do. And I know there will come a point, and I'm looking forward to the question about what specifically might we do differently, and in particular, what might law firms do differently to ensure women are given a fair shake. I'm active with the Minority Corporate Counsel Association, their Leadership Council on Legal Diversity. I serve on their board. I support the Corporate Council Women of Color. I've been involved in ABA, the National Bar Association meetings, and meetings of our DC bar. We started a Diverse Partners Network about 15 years ago to focus on the careers and opportunities of diverse partners. We started an African American Managing Partners Network and a General Counsel Network, and we have a newsletter that goes out to 6,000 people each week, which chronicles the achievements of women and men who are diverse in the legal profession. And our whole point here is to have an impact on the profession, and we join, and I salute the WBA and its work, and my friend Bridget Bailey Lipscomb, and ensuring that women have opportunities not only today but tomorrow. So thank you. Pleasure to be with Karen, Kate, and Kris, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Ben. Next, I'd like to ask Kris Monteith to introduce herself as well.
Thank you so much, Kate. I am Kris Monteith. I am Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau at the Federal Communications Commission. The Wireline Bureau is an organizational unit within the FCC that has responsibility for wired communications, as its name implies. We are about 160 strong. In the Bureau, I like to think that we're pretty lean and mean. We're part of the workhorse of the agency, and we handle some very big, major policy rulemaking proceedings, such as one that you may have heard of by various names: net neutrality, open internet, restoring internet freedom. I have been at the Commission for 23 years or so, in various positions within the agency. There are 7 operating bureaus within the agency, and I have headed up 3 of them. the Enforcement Bureau, the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and now the Wireline Competition Bureau. Prior to joining the FCC, I was in private practice with 2 different law firms, Keller and Heckman and McDermott Will and Emery. And in terms of my experience with diversity and inclusion issues, I don't have the credentials, I would say, of Kate or Ben or Karen in a formal sense. What I think I do bring to the table is a lifelong commitment to mentoring, to respecting the individual, to nurturing people. I have run major organizations within the FCC, as I mentioned, as large as 300. And I consider the people within those organizations to be the greatest asset of which I have responsibility. And I spend a lot of time in career development, career counseling, mentoring, being an ally, that kind of thing. So I am delighted to be on this panel, and I look forward to a great conversation on this very important topic at this very important time in our history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kris. I appreciate everyone's introducing themselves. Very interesting to hear everyone's involvement and background. So I'd like to start with a question and frame it a little more as a positive than a negative. I think everyone is very aware, particularly at this moment, that the diversity numbers in legal employers are not where we would like them to be. And that is not without having a long track record of initiatives and efforts to change that. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists to share their thoughts on why that is so hard, but rather than focusing as a negative, approaching it more about what they could see changing that would actually be somewhat more effective in boosting those numbers. So my next question will talk to individual experience, what you've had as an ally and mentor of individuals and that you think has worked well. But first, let's start with kind of the systems or organizational piece and your perspective on kind of what has made this hard and what gets in the way. Karen, would it be all right to start with you?
Sure. I love this question. And I love it in part because it was after I left the literal practice of law and took up more full-time the practice of teaching, because I had taught NITA, I'm just going to use that as a phrase, the National Institute for Trial Advocacy, so everyone knows what I'm saying. But we have programs all over the nation, and I had co-led the program at Georgetown for a number of years. After I left practicing, I had opportunity to reflect on why my later years as a law firm partner managing cases and leading younger people, just meaning less experience in their team work on that case, had a lot to do with a mind shift. And I didn't recognize until I stepped out of the legal environment. I promise this is not a knock on law. I love it, but not until I stepped out of the legal environment did I begin to see the different culture we have around how it is we help other people, our colleagues. Certainly we help, certainly we're sincere, certainly we want the best. There's no doubt about that. Man, woman, skin tone, there's no doubt that we want it. But we're really kind of inept. And I ask myself why. And so I've isolated it down to this kind of thinking. And this is something I've never tested out, so I welcome all afternoon for people to say that's not true. But here's my thinking. We go through law school, you remember your first year of law school, it's like, oh, this whole new way of analysis. I'm going to do terrible on my first semester exams. No one wants to actually talk about policy. We're all talking about the steps. And why is that? Because we are learning a technique. We are learning the discipline of reasoning, a Socratic reasoning, which is why we teach that way, and the discipline of if this plus this plus this, and then apply this precedent, then we get to this answer. And if we think about ourselves as first years and look at ourselves as second, third, fourth year associates, we know that our own history was a struggle. Now, come on, admit it. We did well, people liked our memos, there's no blame or shame, and that's the point. We worked to excel in a situation where we took those techniques of analysis, which are critical, and God bless the Supreme Court that we may continue that. We took those and we made them our person. Now that's not bad. It's just to say that when we talk about helping other people to do their best in our economic success system of practice, we need to recognize that the techniques we use to excel for our clients are just simply mostly not relevant to the techniques to build talent. And I don't mean to discern talent and then elevate that. I mean to build it like you would in a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old and all those growth stages of, new consciousness. So here's my opposite paradigm. Do you all remember the movie where the star was some guy, you would know him, I don't remember names of actors, and he was the horse whisperer. Do you remember this movie? The troubled girl, she went to a ranch to kind of work it out. There was therapy there. She worked with horses, and one of the horses was kind of like her. And the question was how to make the horse less dangerous. And the fellow who was running this program, probably a relative, I make up the plot, was able to take this stallion who was just not on the beam and just whisper. And that has been an image for me for most of my practice as I'm thinking about how do I drop back and kind of sublimate myself and forget why we're doing this law for a minute and whisper with the person that I'm talking to. I thought that was just kind of hokey until I exited practice and used that thinking as I was working with non-lawyers, some not college graduates, most college graduates, some master's degrees in organizational dynamics, really accomplished people, and helping to make that organization run well. And that was a lot of personalities to manage in and among themselves as they dealt with lawyers who were the faculty. So here's my new paradigm. There's a learner and there's a master. You can see it in Japanese culture with the sensei. I mean, that's our paradigm, a learner, a master. When do we as lawyers somehow become the master? And how do we know we have? Well, we put our bios on LinkedIn and our partners put us on committees and we run cases and our clients like us. So there are all these little badges. All those little badges are not a pronouncement because all partners are in theory equal in terms of their obligation to grow the firm and to grow the department, to grow the practice if it's a general counsel office. But face it, there's no graduation ceremony between learner and master. My real beef with that is that the real graduation ceremony is the third phase. Learner, never stop learning. Master, and teacher. And that comes back to the Japanese culture, the sensei, the honored, everybody bows. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying internally, as we are managing lawyers who we know are technique oriented, we need to set that aside, use what we have as a master, and become a teacher for that moment. I'll stop by just saying it's all for me what Brene Myers has said and Kate Neville has on her email as a signature. I think this is essential. Biases are stories we make up about people before we know who they really are. Empathy and compassion come out of having relationships with people who are different than us. And to me, in between that is our work as a manager to become as familiar with the difference as we possibly can and to elevate it. Enough said.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was very insightful, and particularly highlighting the difference between the skill sets of becoming a master attorney and developing more junior attorneys. That those skills are not necessarily opposed to one another, but they are not the same. So Ben, I'd love to hear your perspective on what you see as making this a challenge and what's been difficult. You're on mute, let me just say.
Thank you. Well, I wish I could be as eloquent as Karen and as insightful, but I'm afraid I'm not. I think that obviously this situation is different. In my experience, which has largely been in a law firm, though I did have a stint at the Department of Justice early in my career, there was always this process of learning your craft, learning to write, learning to reason, learning to marshal facts, and quite frankly, as is often the case, people who were in the senior positions, typically male, typically white, generally felt more comfortable with someone more like them than others. That's just the human condition in part. And so I think some of that remains a challenge. I think that people make assumptions about another person's intellectual capability, another person's availability based upon their gender and personal status. And I think oftentimes these assumptions are unfounded, these biases, these stories that we make up before we meet someone. What I hope, though, is that we are in a time in the legal profession where we cannot afford to waste talent. And we must nurture and grow that talent. And so the successful manager, the successful supervisor, the successful general counsel identifies the talents that each person has, builds on those talents, recognizes the weaknesses, and helps that person confront his or her weaknesses and make that a strength. And so from my perspective, I think the most gratifying thing in the world is to see the growth of another person and to think that in a small way, you may have positively influenced that other person. But I think, unlike my personal experience, isn't so much that I have taught or been taught, but I think the great experience is that someone has seen something in me that I may not have seen, or hopefully I've seen this potential, this possibility in another person that they have not seen. You see, Kate, my personal view is no one is from birth decides, I want to be a tax lawyer. No one from birth decides, I want to work in-house for a life insurance company. No one from birth decides that she wants to start her own law firm. Someone else plants that seed. Someone else sees the capability and says, you know, you really write beautifully. You should write more. And you are, you have a positive influence on other people. They will follow you. And so just make certain you're leading them in a path that's that's a good one. And so I think that what I hope will happen in the profession is that where we have fewer people taking the LSAT, fewer people going to law school, that we will not waste those who are keenly interested. I also hope, Kate, that when we speak of the law and we speak of the profession, words matter. And when people describe their work as drudgery and boring and whatever, that influences another person. But I believe that there's been no significant movement, and at least in this country, where lawyers haven't played a significant role, from civil rights to women's rights to climate change, you name it. The law has changed these things. And when you compare the law with other professions, I don't know of other professions that do pro bono work at the level that lawyers do for the public good. So I'm very proud of our profession. I'm very proud of the women and men who are part of it. And I hope in whatever time I have left that I will help someone identify the strength that I see in them so that they will find their voice, and not where I think they should go, but rather they will have the confidence to pursue whatever their passion happens to be, ideally within the profession. So I hope I'm responsive to your question, and thank you very much for it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. Very helpful to think about the role of a supervisor, mentor, ally, really holding up a mirror, because we all operate in our own worlds and aren't necessarily aware of what potential we might be bringing to the table or how others see us. And that, coupled with feedback and positive encouragement, seems to make a lot of difference. So Kris, can you share with us your thoughts on kind of the ally and mentor role and what makes it challenging and what you've seen in your experience?
Sure, and I just want to say, Ben, I could not agree with you more that the most rewarding thing, at least to me, in one's career is helping others along their path and feeling like in some small way, perhaps you contributed to their lives, to their jobs, to their well-being, you know, all of those good things. And I think of the various parts of my job, the part that I hope I take most seriously is that part of my job, to help further the careers of those that I work with. And sometimes that means giving them permission to fly somewhere else, you know, and you do that because you want them to succeed, but you also do that because you hope that maybe they'll return to you someday. But you know, a couple of things, and just to talk for a minute about, you know, diversity and why sometimes that's so hard, diversity in your staff. I think diversity requires real intention and a hard look at your policies and how your policies may be undercutting your intention for a diverse workforce, a diverse staff. And just two examples from the commission. We have an attorney honors program by which we recruit new attorneys. And it's a very competitive program at the commission. In any given year, we may bring on perhaps as many as 12 or so attorneys in a class when we get literally hundreds of applications. And we have various criteria. that we look at and in interviewing our candidates. When I served as part of the recruitment committee on the honors program, I started to look and examine at where are we really recruiting from, and we're recruiting from, you know, the Harvards, the Yales, which are just great, the Stanfords, the Columbias, and all of those schools. And I really questioned why we were not recruiting from law schools within our own backyard, so to speak, and law schools that have very diverse law students. So we broadened our horizons and we started to recruit from the DC metro area, from American and Catholic, and you know, we had been recruiting from Georgetown and George Washington, but from Howard as well. Why are we not actively recruiting from Howard? And I think that that's just a small example of how your policy or your program can perhaps miss the mark. Another recent example in the FCC's bailiwick, in September, we announced what we are calling our Early Career Staff Diversity Initiative that was spearheaded by FCC Commissioner Starks and Chairman Pai. And I just want to quote really from FCC Commissioner Stark's statement. He said, as a Black commissioner at the FCC, I believe my responsibility is to lift as we climb. And this initiative is aimed at looking at internships within the commission, which are really generally unpaid positions, and whether as a position that's unpaid is eliminating a category of law student that we really want to be able to participate in our programs, which is a student that cannot afford to have an unpaid internship. And the role in which an internship at the FCC plays into that law student's potential success. We look at our interns as, you know, just as law firms do, their summer associates are often their associates in an incoming class. So too with our interns. They help to populate our new staff attorneys. So I think those are just a couple of examples of how our policies can undercut our overall goals if we're not careful and if we're not mindful and paying attention to them. Kate, and just in terms of my own experience with mentoring and being an ally also requires you to really pay attention and be alert to what's happening around you and how that could be, again, affecting the potential of junior attorneys for new opportunities. You know, are you being inclusive in inviting, you know, everyone to a meeting if you can? Inviting discussion from, you know, the most junior attorney to the most senior attorney on the project? Are some of the ways in which you're going about your practice undercutting the potential of folks to advance in their careers? And mentoring, for me at least, I'd like to think that I've been a lifelong mentor, and I certainly have had some fabulous mentors myself to whom I owe so much. But mentoring to me also requires intention. I have a mentee right now, and I have a standing meeting with that individual every week. If I don't have a standing meeting with that individual, it's much more difficult for me to pay attention to how frequently I'm talking to that person. Certainly I try to make myself available, but it requires, you know, scheduling and foresight on my part.
Thank you very much, Kris. That's very helpful. The importance of intentionality and remaining mindful in terms of, if mentorship and allyship, everybody's busy, right? And caught up in their day-to-day lives and work. And so really thinking, well, what would this be like for someone else? That intentionality, that's very helpful. So I'd like to ask you each to kind of share your best practices, or you can make it a composite person, but what you feel like as a mentor really worked, whether it's one example, and obviously we're not asking for names, or you can draw from your experience, but kind of what results and what led to those results in the mentee that you feel like you could really contribute, kind of what you would. We'll get to lessons learned and what you might have done differently in our next question. But for now, what really, you've all talked about the joy and satisfaction of helping somebody develop. Kind of, can you give us a sense of how you've been able to do that? So Ben, can we start with you this time, just so we mix it up a bit?
Certainly. So from the mentoring standpoint, I think one of the most difficult challenges one faces is what is the question that someone's really asking you when they come to you? So I know from 44 years of marriage that every time my wife says there's too much salt in the soup, that's not really what's bothering her. It may be something else. And so hopefully someone's smiling and has had that experience. So I think it's important for us to not only listen carefully to what the person is saying and not saying, but also to try to put some context around that question. And more often than not, there is an ultimate question, which is, am I in the right profession? Am I doing the right thing? How am I doing? Am I succeeding? I'm feeling awkward. Should I feel that way? Well, the answer is, depending on where you are in your career, if it's early in your career or even you're doing something new, yes, you should feel awkward because you're doing something you haven't done before. And if it were easy, you're probably not being challenged. And so I think from a mentor standpoint, I always am careful to ask myself, how does a person feel after our conversation? I had a wonderful friend who mentored me, and when I was feeling sorry for myself, he would say, how's that daughter of yours? That's the most beautiful little girl I've ever seen. And he'd ask me about my wife, and he'd ask me about my parents, and he reminded me of these other blessings that I had in my life that really were far more important than whatever the challenge of the day happened to be. But when it comes to being an ally, when it comes to being a sponsor, that's a different activity. That's not simply coaching someone up. That's putting him or her in the game, giving them a meaningful opportunity to take the deposition, to cross-examine the expert witness, to be the lead counsel, to spend time with the client and even take over that relationship. And see, the truth of this is, Kate, we don't know what other people say about us when we're not in the room. If you step away from this microphone right now, I'm confident Kris, Karen, and I will have choice words for you. I'm confident, though, they would be quite positive. But what we want is, we want a person who will be an advocate for us when we are not in the room. The person who acknowledges our weaknesses, but also speaks up about our strengths and about what our capabilities are. So to me, that's what is most important. And again, what I see, particularly as it relates to women, and specifically as it relates to women of color, is they leave many of their law firms in droves where they have not gotten meaningful opportunity, where they have been relegated to work that the firm does not deem to be important, and where they do not receive atta-girls in the same way that men receive atta-boys. And so our language, those small microaggressions, here is Robert, what a great lawyer is, and this is Mary. Well, gee, Monique, that's a rather obvious point, but it happens all too often. And the one thing I will say right now, for fear that I won't get a chance to say it later, if there's one thing I would change in law firms, is I would get partners, generally male, to share credit in origination for the work that they bring to the firm. So in most law firms, you're judged on your billable hours collected, right? The work that you manage, but also on the work that you originate. So if I have the privilege of going with Kris and we develop a client and it's the two of us, we come back, seems to me I can do that division. That ought to be 50-50. And if Karen goes with us, it ought to be 1/3 each. Or if Karen has a long-term relationship with the prospective client, maybe Karen has 50% and Kris and I have 25% each. But everyone should come back not simply with an opportunity to work hard, a bunch of hours, but also some of that origination credit. So we all hear about the Mansfield principles and moving the needle, all very important, but you will not be valued as you should be in a law firm context until firms are willing to share origination credit and share those relationships. And others before me at my firm started that. I like to think that I've modeled that behavior, but it makes a difference. I will tell you one story and I will stop. There was a young woman partner, I'd say mid-30s, and she told me, it was almost confessing, that she was pregnant with her third child. And I said, "Are you happy about it?" She says, "I am." I said, "Well, I'm happy if you're happy." And then she wanted to join a group, a women's bar group that had been around for 120 years. And I claim to know so much about diversity I didn't know about them. And these are the women who wanted birth control rights. They wanted voting rights. And they did this at a time when they would be subject to violent acts. You know, not a threat, an act. And so she really wasn't asking. Remember what I said about what is a person really asking you? She really wasn't asking my permission to join the organization. What she was asking was, will the firm pay for it? And I said, well, yes. And I said, how much does it cost? And she told me. And I said, do they have an environmental section, which is what we do? Did they have a litigation section, which is what we do? She says, I don't know. I said, well, find out and start those sections. And then I asked her, what's the least expensive meal of the day? And she thought about it for a while. I said, it's breakfast. And we should have programs in each of our offices inviting women who practice environmental law, whether they're in our firm or not, to join us. And I'll never forget, I was at some swanky hotel in New York, and the woman who was general counsel of a major company announced that women from my firm had started their first ever sections in the 120-year history of the organization. But the capper is that I was in an automobile headed to a board meeting in New Hampshire. My phone was about to go out, and this young woman called me, and not since my daughter called to tell me she was engaged as a young woman called me so happy. And I said, what happened? And she says, I just got my first client. And it was a woman that she'd met at this conference. And so she didn't need any help from me. She just needed me to get out of the way so she could do it and to as I alluded to earlier, facilitate her recognition of the ability she had. I once met Peggy Fleming, the Olympian, 1968, and I sat next to her for dinner, and she talked about a father who was a dentist and how encouraging he was, how he took her to practice, how when she was nursing bumps and bruises and illnesses, you know, in figure skating, my understanding is you fall all the time. But he was a sponsor, he was an ally, and she loved her father, but she loved how he supported her, and so there were no more crowds. The Olympic Games had been over 30 years, but she remembered how her father made her feel, and I think that's where we need to be. Are we sponsoring people? Are we speaking up for them when they are not in the room? Are we affording them meaningful opportunities to grow? And are we making certain that the most important rules, when I say most important, and these aren't the most important, but they are relevant in terms of compensation and recognition within a firm, to make certain those are fair. And so we should not be hidebound to old rules. You know, the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present, so said Abraham Lincoln. And I believe we should change where that change will facilitate a transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Very helpful. I was taking notes, so I think that you were summarizing at the end, to understand what a person is really asking when they come to you, and encouragement, the atta girl. I like that statement. And that's part of a growth mindset. Something's new. You're not going to be perfect the first time necessarily. Giving opportunities for good work and advocating on someone's behalf when they're not in the room, and sharing the credit when you go out with them. That seems like, you know, a wonderful template, and reminds me of Maya Angelou's quote, you know, people will always remember how you make them feel that many years later. Yeah, very nice. So Kris, can I ask you to share your thoughts next?
Yes, thank you, Kate. I think I really just want to say that I would like to work for Ben, please. Because Ben, you just like totally nailed it in my mind, and are modeling the type of boss, of mentor that we all want. And if I come anywhere close to that, I'll be very, very happy. Mentoring to me is both rewarding and challenging. You know, and it's interesting in your career and when you sort of switch from being the mentee to the mentor. You know, I couldn't really identify, you know, certainly not any precise moment in which that changed, but you know, at some point you perhaps get enough years under your belt, so to speak, that people start to come to you to ask you questions about their careers, and you shift your roles. But mentoring can also be very challenging. I think it's a little bit scary in some ways to be offering career advice to someone, and it's based on your personal experiences and what you've learned from others along the way. So I would just say that I do think it's very important to listen and to encourage, to offer what you've learned, and to share your wisdom, but also to recognize that, you know, your way isn't necessarily the only way. There are going to be lots of different paths to success, however one defines success. And what you want to do is to recognize that and to be a support for your mentee. I'm working with a woman at the commission right now who does not work for me. She's in a wholly different part of the agency, and she has a very challenging situation, frankly. She tells me about some of her experiences with her supervisors, and I have great empathy. I try to be very empathetic towards her, but I will say that I really like to talk to her supervisors because I feel like they may be the ones that need the mentoring and not my mentee. So those kinds of situations can be very challenging. And my role there is to try to give her my best advice based on my experience, but also to really be supportive of her in what she's going through, because I may not be able to change her circumstance. And my best advice to her may be, it's time for you to start to look around, quite frankly, and think about what other opportunities might be out there. And those can just be very hard situations. But so again, as Ben said so well, it's just listening and trying to understand, as an ally, giving opportunities, sharing credit. I think sharing credit is so important. And I feel very fortunate that I work in an environment where sharing credit doesn't involve really sharing the bottom line in terms of what your income may be in a particular year. It makes it a little bit easier perhaps when that's not a part of the equation. But I think we work in a very collaborative, team-oriented type of environment, and I feel incredibly grateful for that environment. So I'll stop there, Kate.
Thank you, Kris. That's very helpful. And you know, the humility you described, I think, is quite impressive, in that offering career advice is not necessarily, here's my recipe for success, and recognizing that there are other ways to do it, and that people take different paths to move forward, and that it can be scary that when someone's kind of looking to you, they just tell me what to do, what is the answer? And sharing your wisdom from what you've learned, and also being empathetic in recognizing there's some things people can control and some things they can't, and then they have a decision to make, but you can be supportive as they do that. That's very helpful. Thank you. So Karen, can we turn to you and ask you to share your thoughts?
And I love everything that you, Kris, and you, Ben, have laid out and laid on the table. It's kind of the perfect approach to how we ought to be aiming our conduct to achieve those goals. I want to reflect back, just to add something new, not to differ, but you leave me a small subject because you've done it so well. I want to reflect back on my comment about learner, master, teacher, and jump off from that word teacher to talk about what I think are the most trying times for us as leaders in law businesses, law offices. Even if we're doing everything that seems right, we still often just have the sense of, I've had a good conversation with this person and I've encouraged them or helped them steer themselves in a different way. And they've left my office to go off and hopefully do that and come back. Will they ever come back to talk to me again? Mentorship relationships like you have built, Kate, are solid, and it would be fun to reflect at some point about how that was built. So when I use the word teaching as the third pedestal, I want to talk. What I think about is how to be that searching person who doesn't have answers for this person, but who has their back. And I have your back no matter what. So we've worked together and I've helped you get assigned to a deposition, and you've defended some, but it's your first deposition and you're scared. Understand. Now I'm the manager and my job is to make everyone I work with good, to discern their best talents and to put them into places where the whole office together just creates more and more quality and trust across it. How do I work with an individual person? And my default on thinking about teaching is to say, I have a proposal. Let's you and I go into a trust relationship. I will guide you. I'll be here for you. I will be certain that as you're putting together your outline, you have doubts. I'll be the teacher. Teacher doesn't mean I tell you. Teacher means you try something and I'll give you feedback on exactly what you tried. I'm not going to tell you how I did it. I may give you advice on some alternatives that work well, but I'm going to let you do it in a safer environment. And if we can build that kind of relationship, and you go out and do the deposition, don't worry about it. You'll get another one, but hopefully you can use some of the things you're kind of practicing or worrying about with me. You could analogize that to almost anything, any activity that a corporate counsel has to do, a big negotiation that has to go right because it's essential as the ballet step prior to what you hope will be a merger proposal. What's a younger lawyer, what's a lawyer who isn't already at a semi-executive level going to do about that? The answer is we have to put lawyers in situations that are big challenges, big lifts. We know they may be at risk, and our job is to be there with locked elbows, not with advice, but with constant feedback. I love the way you asked that set of questions. You may have gotten farther if you'd started with this person, because with this question, because as you move it forward, then you have that established, you drop back, now you have 2 points established, now you can ask your hard question. Teaching them the techniques, but the management part is willing them to succeed. Somebody taught me that. I didn't learn it the wrong way. I learned it the hard way. And I was lucky to be in a position where the firm needed lots of junior lawyers to take lots of depositions, as an example. And we were out there. So yes, we were newbies and scared, but yes, we had lots of responsibility. You know what? Lawyers rise to a higher responsibility if they know they're trusted to try. Someone believes in me and I'm actually going to have to do that. And they know they have a teacher they can go to and say, my brain is going to explode. I have to give this closing argument tomorrow. I've given it twice out loud to myself. I'm too shy to give it to somebody else, and I've decided it's terrible. Well, all right, call your family, I'll call mine. Let's figure this out. And my role with them never goes into any record. It is a trusted manager. So I think in the end, the things I worry about in the end about how to be a good manager of lawyers in law businesses of any sort comes down to the question of what do you do when the moment is here and you're facing a person you don't know, maybe you're interviewing them, or you do know and you saw them fall on their knees the last time. what do you do? Do you say, well, here's what our firm is doing and here's what we're looking for. How do you fit that? No, because you haven't learned anything about them. Or someone who fell on her knees the last time she tried something and had to go through some personnel things thinking about it, do it. Now she has to do it again. What do you do with that? That's the hard question, is helping them be sure that they're willing to take a chance, that they probably will then be equipped to succeed because you're there to show them what we don't learn in law school. It's really that simple. And it's tucked in to all of the great wisdom we have about mentoring and allyship, but it's an extra trust level and an extra bit of teaching. So that was the only thing I can add to these wonderful insights that Ben and Kris have given us.
Thank you, Karen. That was very helpful. It was more than one thing, certainly. The importance of trust and having someone's back and paying attention to them as an individual. You said you're not going to do one thing because I don't know anything about this person. So you actually get to know them as an individual and letting them take ownership over their work. I think that often can be an oversight in that no one wants to make a mistake, but when they rise to the occasion and let them try it, it's a very different scenario. And then the importance of feedback. Many people, I think, are hesitant because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings or, have it be awkward, but recognizing you're not doing them any favors if you aren't telling them what they could do differently, but saying it in a way that actually continues to build the trust. It's all very helpful.
Literally learning by doing it.
Absolutely. So I have not wanted to cut anything short, but we are at a point now where we should move to our small groups shortly. I am going to ask you each to say one thing, if you're willing, about what you think legal employers could do differently that would make it easier for diverse and female attorneys to rise and advance in their careers. Or it could be one thing, if it's more personal, about what you, looking back on your career, might have done differently. So, but just one from each of you. And then I'm going to ask the audience if you have questions that you would like to make sure the panelists see. Can you go ahead and enter those in the chat? Because we can revisit them when we come back as a group, but we're not going to have a chance now to go through them. So thank you for your indulgence. So Karen, no, I'm sorry, Kris. I was trying to mix it up, the order. So we'll start with Kris and then go that way.
So for me, I think, and I'm talking both about my law firm experience, but my FCC experience too. And I would say that this is one part of my FCC experience that I am so grateful for, and probably a reason I've stayed at the FCC, and many other women stay at the FCC too. And so as a manager, as an employer, the one thing I think you can do is give people flexibility in their schedules. And I will tell you that when I joined the commission, I joined as a single mom with a 5-year-old. And I joined the commission in part because I wanted to spend more time with my 5-year-old. And at a law firm, that was very hard as a single mom. Over the course of my experience at the commission, and I can think of one of my early management opportunities. I was interviewed for a position and as chief of one of our divisions. And wasn't actually the guy that was going to be the boss. It was the guy that was going to be the boss's boss. And he asked me in interviewing me, and this is something that we'll get to, actually he didn't ask me. I said to him, I think I can do the job, but I want to tell you right up front that I need to leave here every day at 5:15 No ifs, ands, or buts. I'm walking out the door. I have a 6-year-old, by then 6-year-old, that I need to pick up, and I have no backup. I'm a single mom. And I'm telling you, I can do the job. I'll get back online. I'll, do whatever I need to do. But the 5:15 is not negotiable. And I remember later on him saying to me, boy, you really made me pause as to whether or not you were the right person for the job, because I was very concerned about that. But someone else said, she's good, she's a hard worker, she'll get it done. So he took a chance on me, so to speak. And I think that flexibility to make my personal life and my work life work for me was critical. And I see that all the time with other women, and not just women, men at the agency, that they are able, because of the flexibility that the commission allows, to achieve that work-life balance, to make their personal life and their work life work. And we get great work out of our people because we're willing to give them that flexibility. So that would be my one thing employers can do. Trust your people that they can do the job, give them flexibility.
Thank you. Karen, what would your one be?
I would find some way, probably through lots of practice with everyone talking, to help corporate general counsel offices and firms be comfortable talking about race. I had an experience when I was doing some research, preparing a presentation around gender in law firms for an audience in DC. And I wanted us to be fully aware of the varieties of circumstances that every single person, my view about the individual, they're all individuals, we all are. So I wanted to know every single person is facing her own basket, if we assume a binary gender or whatever the gender self-identity is. I wanted to know what people were experiencing. And an associate who I had not worked with, I don't even think she was in my practice group, but I always liked her inquisitiveness, and I always wondered why she was so quiet. And I thought, I'm going to reach out to her because I need help with this, and I'm not going to ask a white person, a woman, to go research this. I'm going to talk to a person who has the personal experience and also the connections and the clubs and everything else. This was early. This was probably 2008, but I'm not sure it's changed a lot in our culture. And so I asked her, and I closed the door. I said, I want to have a conversation in which you and I are both really comfortable. And so I'm closing the door only for that reason. This is not about work. This is about changing the world. And she goes, okay. Yeah. And I said, relax. Here's what I'm working on. And she knew that. And here's where I want to go with it. And she was quiet. And I said, it is abundantly clear to anyone who's looking at the situations that women lawyers, as much as we talk about the problems, are largely white women. That's just how the system has worked it. And we are talking in terms that mean things to white women. And I'm both tired of that and courteous. I'm tremendously worried about it. And I really want to work with you. And I wanted you to work on this because you have the Black experience. And she looked at me with an astonished expression. And the first thing she said, she had to take a deep breath. And I thought, I've really done it now. And she looked back at me and she goes, I have been here for 4 years. And you are the first person to use words attached to your recognition that I'm a Black woman. People don't talk about the fact of race. I don't think we have the language for it. We are kind of using people of color, which has an ancient history, by the way, that started 109 years ago with a journalistic piece. Look it up in Wikipedia. It's a new word to us within the last decade. I'm not an expert on it, so I'm looking at Ben for reassurance on all of this. But that's the point, right? Is that we don't talk enough in order to understand what we're talking about and how we are talking in ignorance. And I think we're good enough friends inside a law office, any law office, to risk that so that we can begin giving each other feedback and have an open culture, or open the culture gradually to allow folks to say, I know what you're thinking. Can I suggest some different words? And here's what those words sound like to somebody, and here's why, because you're using adjectives for every noun that means human being, you know, a black this, a Mexican this. I mean, you're making all these mistakes, and here's why. If we can get comfortable with that, I think we can do a lot as managers to improve the appetite of every person to bring their talents, to groom them with our patient teaching kind of guidance, and to stay.
Very helpful. Absolutely. You've touched on something that I think a lot of people are talking about, but the skill set and the experience of how to do it, and what you've talked about throughout, marrying the conversation about race with the individual, not making assumptions and asking questions, and if they feel like answering them. So is very helpful. So Ben, I'm going to ask you for your one as the final word before we go into breaks.
Thank you, Kate, and I will try to be brief. And thanks to my colleagues on this panel, Kris and Karen. They both offered great insight today. I was moved by Karen's one thing, talking about race, and I feel impelled to say something here that I've said on many occasions. I'm not the chairman of my firm because of my intelligence or my good looks, and you can hear and see both of those things, but rather it's that I have business, and it makes my observations interesting and my insights worth listening to. But I owe that work overwhelmingly to women, and overwhelmingly to women of color. So I hope as long as I have breath, I will recognize not only those in my family, my wife, my mother, my daughter, who've made enormous sacrifices for me, but for the many women who chose to take a chance, send me work, when if things did not work out, they would have been the subject of ridicule. And so I owe them everything. So that's why I hope when we deal with these issues, and when we talk about women, we're also talking about women of color. I grew up in the Deep South, and they always would say the South with a capital S, but that meant 2/3 of the South. It didn't mean the third of the South that was African American. As to my one thing, I would say delay, right, is not denial. And I believe that. I've seen that in my own life. And it's hard to hear words of encouragement when you've been rejected. But those are the words that I would offer to anyone who would care to listen, certainly a woman who's going through great challenges. The other thing I would hope that law firms would do and companies would do is give people permission to make mistakes. My career has not been one of a rocket-like race to the top. It's been full of hills and valleys. To paraphrase Langston Hughes, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. And I think the ultimate point, though, is that there's something about the human spirit, irrespective of gender, and women know this. Women know this because they're working, they're raising families, sometimes raising husbands, and hopefully someone's smiling somewhere. But I'm reminded of the words of Simon and Garfunkel. they talked about the boxer. Are you guys familiar with that song? In the last verse, he says, in the clearing stands a boxer and a fighter by his trade. And he carries the reminders of every glove that laid him down or cut him till he cried out in his anger and his shame, I'm leaving. But the fighter still remains. So I would say to those that may be within the sound of my voice, I hope the fighter in you remains. And if it doesn't, find it. And find people who will encourage that fight, because it's that fight that is the essence of life. And as Kris and Karen and Kate have shown, and Bridget have shown in each of their lives, that has made all the difference. So thank you so much. And please, Kate, I'm sure I've forgotten the instructions, so would you mind reminding us of what we're supposed to do next?
Of course. Thank you so much, Ben. That's a lovely way to end this part of the session.